Tabletop role-playing games, TTRPGs, are games. As games, they're systems-based, they're mechanics. They follow game design principles. Game design principles are something that are well documented. You could read up on them, you could read white papers, you could go to class on it, you could take a master class on it, you could study it for years. Doing some recent research, however, I came across something that I found a bit interesting. And in reality, this isn't groundbreaking. This isn't world-shattering. But for some people, I think it might be useful to consider this. There are a lot of things that we can study. And while we know how things are supposed to work, in the reality of things, they often don't. Sometimes game design and software design conflicts with business principles and goals. And there is a very big difference based on people's intention when going through game design, especially when working with something like a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder or Shadowrun or an indie RPG. And using two examples of games that were published not too far apart from one another, let's look at Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is back when it was still D&D Next, in between 2012 and 2014. I was reading over some of the interviews of the design team, and one of the things I found interesting repeated again and again was, yes, we've opened up a large playtest because several reasons, part of that being 4th edition fell flat. This time we want to get it right. Now, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with 4th edition. There was a lot of genius in it. It just failed to launch. And opening the playtest up to thousands upon thousands of players, they were able to get feedback and integrate that feedback. Of course, they also had the coffers to go ahead and afford someone to correlate, collect all that data. They had an online character designer people were using so they could pull data from that. They had a lot of tools available to them that most indie creators don't, never will. And one of the things that the developers said, who were working on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, what they found was people didn't care about the rules. They didn't care so much about the mechanics when they were getting the feedback. The thing was that people wanted to be a part of D&D. They wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons. And so a lot of the feedback that they were getting was more about the fantasy, the story, the world. Although, admittedly, there's very few rules supporting that fantasy, that world, those different campaigns. The mechanics are the bulk of what they've written, but that is not what brought people to the game. People want to play the game. They want to play Dungeons & Dragons. There's rules that will help out with that. Okay, sure, we'll use those too. But they really were an afterthought for a large base of the players. And this brings me back to my point before about where I differ with a lot of other creators. The game is the system is the game. I don't agree with that. I believe the game is the game. It is supported by the system. And I believe these statements from these developers who supports that fully. The other part about it is they had the amount of time and money and resources they needed to go through with these large play tests, to iterate, to change. And they had teams of people working on it. So that enabled them to do a lot of things that a lot of us just simply won't be able to do. Meanwhile, another creator around the same time, from Margaret Weiss Games, went ahead and they put out the Marvel Super Heroic game, if anyone remembers that. A fine game. It's a fun game. It's, dice pool system, kind of a precursor to Cortex Plus. It uses Cortex, but I wouldn't say it's quite Cortex Plus. And one of the things in that game that I called out was the lack of character creation rules. The character creation rules in that game when it was first published were, take a look at what characters are already in the book presented to you and then make your own, and you will know if you have done it right or you have done it wrong based on the reaction of the table. That was it. I don't fault the creator for what they did. That was their choice. I did question why that would be the choice. That was one of the most fun parts about the old Face Rip Marvel. Making that character through different tables and everything was a lot of fun. But I had also noticed over the past couple of years, a lot of Marvel-based games across different medium did not allow for character creation. And so I was wondering if this might have been part of the contract Was this a contractual obligation to not have character creation, to just let people play in Marvel's sandbox using their characters only? That creator took that question as a criticism and was highly offended, and replied very strongly and very vehemently that this is the game that I wanted to play, so I made the game I want to play. If you don't want to play it, don't play it. Okay, that wasn't really the question, but what an interesting way for the paths of TTRPG game design to diverge. You've got one group who has a lot of money, has a lot of backing, that says we're going to go out and have the players tell us how they want to play the game, how they want us to make the rules. You've got a smaller company who doesn't have all those resources, so to do the same thing would be quite difficult. Their response instead is, I'm going to do it how I want to do it. You're either on board or you're not. I don't think either way is right or wrong. I just think they're two different ways to meet the same ends. They both put out a good, solid game. They put out a game that a lot of people liked. One, obviously, still doing quite well. The other, not, unfortunately. And it's not based on playability or anything. We know why there is an 800-pound gorilla in the room with an ampersand shaved into its chest. And so there was just an interesting theory to me, the divergent path right at the beginning. We're going to have the player tells how to do it. We're going to do it our way, buy it or don't. And that, I believe, led to a great many decisions. The other thing that was interesting is the group that was getting the feedback found out, hey, all these rules, a lot of people have D&D discourse over and argue in forums about and everything. Only the hardcore players argue about that. Most of them don't care. And the reality is, most don't. Look at the response from the OGL debacle of 2023, right? A lot of us were all up in arms. We're dropping D&D. But no one else cared, right? Other people were still playing. You'd mention it to a casual player. Huh? What? I don't know. I bought these books. I don't need to buy any others. And that is a difference in player levels in the hobby. It's perfectly fine. But it does mean that we have to keep those kinds of things in consideration. Who are we really making the game for? A lot of indie creators I know say, I made this game because I can't find one like it and I want to play it. I would say that is probably close to 9 out of 10 indie game creators that I know. I wanted a game, I didn't see it, so I made one. Or I liked this game, but I didn't like how they did it, so I made my own version of it. I don't know of any indie game creators who come out thinking, we're going to take the world by storm, and everyone's going to fall in love with our game, and we're going to be the next big thing on the shelves. So I think that probably the majority of indie game players do fall into that second crowd of, I'm going to make the game I want to play, and if you're on board, great. If you're not, oh well. They do play testing. They can't do it with the amount of resources that Wizards of the Coast can, and they're going to a smaller targeted audience. And I've been in a number of those indie RPG beta tests and alpha tests. And in my experience, mechanics, as long as they work, are often not critiqued. They're often overlooked in these discussions because while you have a lot of hardcore players, you don't have as many hardcore players dedicated to that one thing. Or they aren't there for the mechanics. They're there for the game. Until I see you again, remember to be well, be safe, and be awesome, both to yourself and one another.